Dear colleagues, friends all, a very warm welcome to this launch of Volume 5 of the 2022 results for the OECD's flagship program for international student assessment, or PISA. This fifth volume provides a new evidence base on students' preparedness for continuous learning, adaptability to new circumstances, and ability to navigate unpredictable situations. It supplements the data we have already released on students' academic performance on reading, mathematics, and science. Building flexibility, critical thinking, and creative problem-solving skills will indeed be essential to prepare students for ongoing changes across our economies and societies. Enabling the innovation and greater productivity needed to manage the labor force pressures, including from an aging population. Preparing students to use developing technologies like AI to pursue new opportunities, with OECD analysis showing that around 27% of current jobs are at high risk of automation from AI. And ensuring everyone has the best possible opportunity to participate in and benefit from the green transition, since we project that net zero policies will significantly impact a quarter of all jobs. This report offers new insights into how well our education systems are preparing students for all of these challenges. As several countries have seen a remarkable decline in students reporting significant anxiety when doing mathematics problems, which affects academic performance. Korea saw the biggest drop, from 43.5% in 2012 to 32.4% in 2022. Other countries showed strong results in critical thinking. For example, 80% of Portuguese students reported that they consider everyone's perspectives before taking a position. But many students across PISA countries and economies reported struggling with motivation, anxiety, and self-directed learning. Only 50% of students in OECD countries reported enjoying learning new things at school, and 47% reported enjoying challenging schoolwork. And only about 20% of students say they apply mathematics solutions to real-life situations. We have identified several key priorities to enable further progress. First, by better equipping students for self-directed learning. PISA 2022 results show that key learning behaviors for students, such as connecting new knowledge to past lessons and asking questions when they have doubts, should be further encouraged. On average, 47% of assessed students across OECD countries ask questions frequently when they do not understand something being taught in their mathematics classes. Helping students feel confident and supported can empower them to take greater control over their learning progress. For example, Estonia's Youth Sector Development Plan for 2021-2035 aims to build self-confidence through voluntary activities offered in youth centers, which encourage entrepreneurship and demonstrate the value of lifelong learning. Students who frequently interact with their parents and receive tailored support from their teachers are also more likely to engage in proactive learning and other positive learning behaviors. Education systems should ensure open communication between parents and teachers about the role parents can play. For example, guiding children with homework while encouraging them to be self-directed in completing assignments. Second, by developing targeted interventions to address socioeconomic and gender differences in performance. PISA data shows that students who enjoy learning for its own sake, or when they have a specific goal in mind, are more likely to adopt effective learning strategies. Girls often show higher motivation but experience more anxiety in subjects like mathematics, affecting their readiness for lifelong learning. The gender gap in anxiety persists even among top-performing students, and students from disadvantaged backgrounds also exhibit higher anxiety levels in mathematics compared to their peers. Schools need to provide tailored support and ensure that girls and disadvantaged students do not perceive learning outcomes like performance in mathematics as inherently difficult or beyond their capabilities. Third, by fostering positive school environments to boost students' confidence in gathering and assessing information. PISA results show significant variations in self-reported ability in many jurisdictions, with some top-performing school systems showing large confidence gaps between low-achieving students and students with better performance. While many students express confidence in finding information online, across the OECD, only 40% of low performers, on average, say they can easily access the quality of online information, a skill which is essential in today's digital world. Teaching practices then, such as cognitive activation, where teachers encourage students to think about how to solve mathematics problems in different ways and asking them to explain their reasoning, have been shown to build students' confidence in navigating ambiguity and complexity. The OECD will continue to expand our evidence base for sound education and skills policies. On 10 December, we will release the latest results of our survey of adult skills, which sheds further light on the evolution of adult proficiency over the past decade, skills imbalances, and the economic impact, as well as the conditions that best foster lifelong learning and upskilling. We very much look forward to working with you to leverage our analysis for more effective, inclusive, and future-ready education systems. Thank you.
Salam alaikum, and welcome from wherever in the world you are joining this launch today. This is a very special day. It is the first time that we launch a PISA report in the United Arab Emirates, and in fact, in the Middle East. And this is a very special report. In this report, we do not just ask, how well have students learned today, which is what we usually ask in PISA. We ask how well are students prepared to learn tomorrow and for the rest of their lives. Because that is the key of success today. In this world, yes, you can prepare yourself in school, but the key is, will you continue to expand your horizon every day in your lives? Are you ready to learn for jobs that have not been created? Are you ready to use technologies that have not been invented? Are you ready to solve social problems that we cannot yet imagine? In the past, we used to learn to do the work. We went to school, we went to university, vocational education, then we did the work, and one day we retired. In the future, learning will be very different. In the future, early childhood education and care will be much more important than in the past, because some of the most important skills and attitudes and values we learn best in the earliest years of our lives. University, vocational education need to be much more transversal, integrating working and learning. And good places of work today are great places of learning, and great places of learning are always good at anticipating the evolution of skill demand. And if we look at the results, we're not doing that well. We have only 6 out of 10 workers who are ready to learn in their lives. 6 out of 10. And when we ask them, why? So when we talk about learning for the future, what are we talking about? The first thing, we need to manage our own learning behavior. That's very important. We need to ask the right questions, making sure in our work that there are no mistakes. We need to think critically, reflect on our learning. That's equally important. We need to solve problems constructively. We need to activate our learning, to engage in learning, to question what we do, not just to produce answers, to connect what we know with what we have learned in the past. And we need to be proactive towards learning. These are the keys to lifelong learning. So let's look at some of them in greater detail. To what extent are people ready to ask questions about what they do to adjust their learning? Today's world, the world of ChatGPT does no longer reward you for repeating answers. It rewards you for asking the right question, not for reproducing the established wisdom of our times, but for questioning it. And also to validate, to verify knowledge, to distinguish fact from opinion. Those are very, very important kind of learning strategies. And what we see is that people who do well on the PISA test, who are skilled performers, are much more likely to ask questions. First of all, we see that there are big difference in the propensity of students to ask questions. You look to students in Austria, in Albania, in Iceland, where students often ask questions. In Chinese Taipei and Poland, that's rarely the case. But what we see in every country is that students who are less skilled are less likely to ask questions, whereas students who are more skilled are more likely to ask questions. Those two things are closely interrelated. We see the same pattern when we ask, to what extent are young people making sure there are no mistakes. You see in the case of Korea, students are very diligent. They check that they don't make mistakes. In other countries, it's less likely the case. But once again, what we see is that skilled performers are much more likely to ask themselves those kinds of questions. So you can see how learning strategies and learning outcomes are really closely connected. What we also see that in most systems, students asking questions when they do not understand things are much more likely to have a growth mindset in virtually every country for which we have data. And that growth mindset is so important in your lives. If you believe that success is all about the intelligence you were born with, you're not likely to invest in your learning. You do not believe that you can make a difference. But if you believe the sky is the limit and learning depends on the effort you invest in it, you're likely to be successful. And you can see the propensity to ask questions is related to that kind of growth mindset. Let's go to the second aspect, your capacity to think critically, to agree, that there can be different versions of, an answer, that you can look at problems from different perspectives, appreciate different ways of thinking, different answers. And you can see again, overall, many students are critical thinkers, but actually often many students are not ready to actually engage with different perspectives. Still, in education, we often teach students one answer to a problem rather than to think about the problem through multiple perspectives, multiple kind of perspectives. When you think, for example, the students who agree that look at everybody's perspective, you can see still that in different countries it plays out very different. You can see in some countries like Portugal and in Ireland, students are much more likely to consider everybody's perspectives before taking a position, whereas in other countries here on the left side, students are more likely to believe there is just one answer to a question. And if you have that idea, you just have to learn one answer. You're not going to probe questions. You're not looking at problems from multiple perspectives. So those things are very different. The fact that these things vary so much across countries tells us something, that education can do something about this. Let's look at proactivity towards learning. Now, do I connect what I know to what I'm learning? No. Do I participate in discussions, engage myself? Very, very important aspects as well. So once again, let's look at some of the results from PISA. What we see very clearly is that more proactive students perform higher. Here you can see the average score of students on the PISA test. This is the familiar picture, students doing well, less well in other countries. But once again, when you look at less proactive students and proactive students, you can see there is a consistent performance gap in every country. Having students who are more proactive is meaning they're likely to be better achievers, better performers. That's an important message to teachers already, to ensure that students are not passive consumers of prefabricated content, but that they are actively engaged in learning process. It works really in every country like this. We also know that students who are intrinsically motivated, and that motivation comes from themselves rather than from the environment, they are 3 times more likely to make sure there are no mistakes in their schoolwork. They are much more diligent. They are twice as likely to ask questions if they don't understand something. They're 3 times more likely to check their homework. So once again, if we can get young people interested and motivated through themselves, we're much more likely to see them to be successful learners. And you can see the love of learning, how important it is. You can see, for example, we looked at instrumental motivation. I learn because there's some outside reason that makes me motivated. And we looked at distinguished, school has taught me things which would be useful for a job. And we looked at students who say, I want to do well in mathematics. And then we ask ourselves, to what extent do those motivational characteristics predict the use of effective learning strategies? And here you have the answer. School has taught me things which could be useful in a job, where students have that belief, they're much more likely to use proactive learning strategy. But if they want to do well in mathematics, you can see that relationship is far more pronounced. That love for learning is so incredibly important. We can see the same thing when we look at intrinsic motivation, the motivation that comes from inside, not from the outside world. And again, we distinguish between, I like schoolwork that is challenging, and I love learning new things in school. And once again, when you just like schoolwork that is challenging, yes, you're more likely to use effective learning strategies. But when you say you love learning new things in schools, now that is this curiosity, that desire for learning, you can see that is one of the strongest predictors for actually students engaging in proactive, effective learning strategies, like, making sure there are no mistakes, carefully checking your work, agreeing, that you can look at things from different angles. So we can see how important it is that young people are truly engaged, truly motivated, intrinsically motivated from their work. That's, again, a very powerful message to teachers. Now, it's very easy to teach students something. It is much, much harder to get students, generally interested in this. But you can see how important it is for learning strategies. And you can see here how this plays out in different countries. You can see more in virtually every country, the more students develop intrinsic and instrumental motivations. Now, both are important, to be curious, to be intrinsically motivated, but also to understand, I have to invest myself to do well. You can see the more likely they are going to check their homework, to be diligent about it. You can see also the more likely they are to ask questions. Also, that is something that we can see closely connected to the motivational aspects of students. As you can see, in some countries, those relationships are more pronounced. In others, they are a little bit less visible, but pretty much it works across most countries, which tells us these are pretty universal kind of strategies that we can deploy to make students more interested, more engaged. We also see that students who love to learn new things tend to be more confident. You can see the students who are less confident here in the green dot and the students who are more confident in the blue dot. And you can see the percentage of students who, among the students who love learning new things. And you can see that is basically a strong relationship in every country. Confidence is an outcome that comes from that love to learning. We can see also students who are motivated are much more likely to know what kind of job they want to do in the future. They have a clear idea what the future may entail for them, what the future may bring to them. You can see, for example, the likelihood of knowing what kind of job you want is much greater among students who love learning new things in school. It is much greater among students who say, I like schoolwork that is challenging. It is much greater among students who say, school has taught me things which could be useful in a job. And then also it's greater than for students who say, I want to do well in my mathematics class. Now you can really see how those things are connected, those motivational characteristics and the aspirations for a clearer future. And again, that should be an important outcome of education, education that gives students an idea and understanding of what the future might hold for them. Let's go to something that is closer in the classroom, cognitive activation. Can you explain how you solved the mathematics problem? Not just remember the solution, but actually, explain the solution strategies that you deploy and why. Can you connect new and past learning? Can you understand learning processes? And this is what we call cognitive activation and awareness, how learning occurs and engagement in active learning strategies. And once again, the PISA data show us some very, very interesting findings. First of all, and that is not so unexpected, research has shown that for many years, is that cognitive activation practices predict learning outcomes in mathematics in every country. The performance difference is not that large, but it is clearly visible. So the type of strategies that are being deployed in school have an impact by teachers in classrooms, have an impact on the achievement that we observe among students in virtually every country. We can also see that social and emotional skills predict the use of learning strategies. When you look at the likelihood of students using certain strategies, you can see students who report greater stress resistance are more likely to use certain learning strategies. Emotional control. Students who are better to manage their emotions are more likely to use effective learning strategies. Students who are more social, more cooperative. You can see the links become even stronger. Curiosity, not surprisingly, being a very important predictor of learning strategy. And, persistence. Often, learning well has to do with persisting with the task, trying again when you fail, approaching things differently. You can see that social, emotional aspects are also very, very important predictors of the use of effective learning strategies. And, why do I talk about this? Because learning strategies themselves predict mathematics self-efficacy, the sense of, ownership, the sense of being able to engage with mathematics. Now, you can see students who said, I try to connect new material to what I've learned in previous mathematics lessons. I take an active approach, whatever I learn and so on. You can see that proactivity being a good predictor of mathematics self-efficacy. Students who are managing their own learning, who can control their own learning. Again, asking questions, checking, making sure there are no mistakes, and managing your learning is a good predictor of being confident, have a sense of ownership and self-efficacy. Critical thinking, same thing. I can view almost all things from different angles. I try to consider everybody's perspective. Those aspects are important for critical thinking, and you can see that in itself is an important predictor of mathematics self-efficacy. Cognitive activation, I just showed you some data. You can see a summary of this. Again, the teacher taught us to memorize rules and apply them to solve mathematical problems is a predictor of mathematical self-efficacy. And then, not surprisingly, problem-solving skills as well. So learning strategies do empower us, do give us that sense of self-efficacy, that sense that we can actually do things, overcome difficult challenges, difficult kind of problems. We can also see that students who use learning strategies more actively are more likely to know what kind of job they want to do in the future. I already showed you some statistics here. You see a summary. Once again, your students who are more proactive are more likely to see their future. Students who are better to manage and control their learning are more likely to see their own future. Students who are more critical thinkers are more likely to see their future, and so on. So once again, you can see how learning strategies are actually enabling us to see that pathway to our own future, the kind of work we want to engage with, the reason why we learn. And last but not least, we can see how learning strategies can reduce anxiety. Anxiety with mathematics is still a big issue for many students, particularly girls. They are afraid, they do not see that, they can engage with mathematics. Mathematics is an unknown world, and you can see students who are more proactive towards learning are much less likely to be anxious about mathematics. Students who can control their learning, manage their learning, ask questions when they do not understand are much less likely to be anxious. Students who are better in cognitive activation, managing active learning strategies, you can see they're less likely to be anxious. And students who are more likely to engage in problem-solving strategies are less likely to be anxious. So once again, here are powerful tools for teachers in the classroom to reduce that anxiety that becomes a barrier for effective learning. So that brings me to the question of what teachers in the classroom can do. And you'll see some really interesting results from this report. Now, you can see very clearly if a teacher, if students feel intimidated by their teachers, they are much more likely to be worried, to be anxious. If students perceive that the teacher at my school are mean towards me, students feel more anxious. It's not so much a surprise. So that's the negative side of things. Teacher behavior can drive students' anxiety. But teacher behavior can also reduce student anxiety. For example, if students feel the teachers at my school are friendly towards me, they're less worried. If students say that teachers at my school are respectful, if I came back to visit my school 3 years from now, my teachers would be excited to see me. All of those kinds of perceptions are ones that actually relate negatively to anxiety. And we never know exactly what's cause and effect in those kinds of relationships. Well, what you can see clearly is the perceptions that students have about their teacher are very clearly related to the anxiety they feel towards, studying things like mathematics. So as a teacher, there is something you can do about this. What we also see very clearly, the more frequently students experience that their teachers are supportive to them, the more likely are they showing the kind of proactive learning behavior that you saw before is driving self-efficacy, is driving learning outcomes. Now, the teacher helps students with their learning, where that basically is more prevalent. You can see students being more proactive learners, where students say their teacher gives extra help when students need it. More likely proactive learning behavior. The teacher continues teaching until the students understand, also another predictor of proactivity. And the teacher shows an interest in every student's learning, yet another predictor of proactive learning behavior. So proactive learning behavior is clearly related to what teachers do and how they engage with students and how students perceive them to be supportive and interested in every student's success. We also see when teachers help students, the students are more likely to pay attention, are more likely put effort into the work, and more likely to ask questions. Paying attention is when that happens in almost in most of every lessons, or even in some lessons, you can see a big relationship between those things. So again, the kind of perception of students as teachers being interested and supportive to them has an impact not just on their learning strategies, but also on their willingness to engage themselves, to pay attention, to ask questions, and so on. So again, another powerful area of teacher behavior that can help us to engage students in learning and ultimately achieve better outcomes. And you can see this plays out slightly differently across countries, but in nearly all education systems, students become more motivated when they see their teachers supporting to them. That relationship is particularly strong in Finland, less visible in Poland, but more or less the pattern is very, very clear. Now, there is more personal motivation when students receive teacher support, more perceive it at least. And so again, that is something that is a factor that we observe in every education systems. In most countries, we also see that students who interact with their parents more often are more engaged in learning strategies. Often we think, parental support is about, having yourself an academic degree or spending hours of homework with your children. That is not what this is about. This is simply about showing an interest in your students' learning, showing your students, your children, that what they do in school matters to you. That simple perception is very, very closely related to learning strategies and success. What you can see here, when parents interact with their children more frequently, children are much more proactive in studying mathematics. And it works, for future-oriented discussions. I talked to you about the importance of completing high school. I talked to you about your future education. You can see where that occurs more. You can see students being more proactive at studying mathematics, but also simply for some social activities. Now, you eat dinner with your children. You can see where that happens more frequently. Students are more proactive learners. Or where you just spend talking with your children. Also, that is an important predictor of, more proactive learning behavior in school. So parents have an incredibly important role to play, and it is not related to spending hours on schoolwork. It is simply about showing your children that what they do is important, matters to you, and you're interested in this, you engage with all of this. You encourage students to do well, and so on. And we also see that same effect, actually a little bit smaller, but in the same direction, you get your children to do their homework more carefully, simply by being present, simply by showing interest, simply by spending time talking with your children. Now, where there is that closer link between parents and students and that closer interest, you can see clearly that the behavior of children are proactive learning. You saw that before, and here, checking homework are more pronounced. So it's not just teachers, it is also parents who have a very, very important role to play in ensuring that students become lifelong and life-wide learners. So let me turn to something that is also very important. In the 21st century, mathematics is not just about learning formulas and equations, but it's about learning to think like a mathematician, learning to deal with uncertainty, learning to use mathematics in novel situations. The role of mathematics has fundamentally changed. Now, can you identify the mathematics in a real-world problem? Often, you do not see the nature of the mathematics. You have to find the nature of mathematics. Can you apply it? Can you translate a mathematical solution back into the real world? That's what the modern world expects from you. Most phenomena in today's world express themselves through mathematics. Whether it is climate change or the evolution of a pandemic, you need to have an idea of the concept of an exponential function. Sometimes those concepts are not intuitive for humans. The world of mathematics can open those up to them. So to what extent is that 21st century mathematics prevalent in learning? And you can see in some respects, yes, but in many other respects, we see actually that the 21st century mathematics is not as well developed as you think. For example, coding and programming computers. You have about 45% of students where that kind of mathematics task is not present in their kind of routines. Working with computer mathematics, evaluating the significance of observed patterns in data. Most phenomena today express themselves in uncertainty. Now you have to be able to detect signal and noise, and you can see actually, yes, it's starting to happen. The world is changing in the way mathematics is learned and taught, but not as much as you would wish. There's still many students who are not experiencing that kind of mathematics in the world today. When you look at this by country, you can see in some countries those effects are much, much larger. And what is very interesting is that some of the social emotional skills that we measure actually are good predictors of 21st century mathematics skills, the kind of skills I just shared with you now. And again, we do not know what cause and effect here. There's probably, it's going in both directions, but you can see where students are more persistent, more resistant, resilient towards stress, show greater curiosity, better manage their emotions, are more cooperative. You can see those students are more likely to be confident in the kind of 21st century mathematics aspects that I just shared with you. So that's an interesting relationship, that actually this is not just about the content that you teach, but also the way in which you engage students in that. We see also that learning strategies are quite good predictors of confidence in 21st century mathematics skills. You can see students who show proactive behavior are much more likely to be engaged and confident in 21st century mathematics skills. And we see that even, after controlling for things like school, the socioeconomic background of schools and students. Students who are better in cognitive activation, who see their teachers, requesting them to think, to reflect, to engage with learning, to connect what they learn with what they learned in the past. Now you can see they tend to be more confident in 21st century mathematics. Students who can control their own learning, students who are critical thinkers. So you can see those aspects of learning strategies being actually good predictors of 21st century mathematics. So bottom line is not just about the content of 21st century mathematics, but also the ways in which we activate learning strategies effectively. Why do I tell you all of this? Because students who have more confidence in 21st century mathematics do better on the PISA mathematics test. Now here you see, again, the overall result, the results that you know. And here you see how this plays out among students who are less confident. They tend to be worse performers almost everywhere. And you see students who are more confident in 21st century mathematics skills tend to be better performers. So once again, effective learning strategies can strengthen that confidence in 21st century mathematics skills, and that confidence plays out in terms of better results ultimately. And that brings me to the aspect of self-directed learning. Now, to what extent are students more likely to put effort into mathematics, try to connect new materials with previously learned material, love to learn new things? And you can see here that students who use learning strategies effectively are more confident in their capacity for self-directed learning. Now, self-directed learning is the learning for life. In school, you have a teacher talking to you, structuring your learning. The day you are out of school, you are on your own. You have to take ownership over what you learn and how you learn and where you learn and when in your life are you investing in learning. And you saw in my initial slide here, we're not doing that well today. No, we hope that the next generation is better prepared. And here you can see to what extent that is the case. And the confidence in self-directed learning is actually quite closely related to the learning strategies we talked about, and checking your homework, asking questions, and so on. We also see that students with stronger social emotional skills are more likely to be confident self-directed learners. So again, as a teacher, investing in getting students to become persistent, to try hard, to follow up things, to be curious, to be cooperative, to manage their emotions, even to show empathy and stress resistant, can be actually good predictors of self-confidence in self-directed learning. That brings me to the final point, and that is about the use of digital resources. Now, clearly, a lot of learning today happens in the digital world. For young people, the digital world has become the real world. And what we can see here is the share of students who use digital resources to find things online. And you can see in Denmark, that's a vast majority of students who basically do that, at least once a week. In Japan and Turkey, it's still a lot less common. But you can see in some countries, searching things online is a very frequent thing that students do about real-world problems, things that they need to know. That's the behavior. What we also see is that there are some gender gaps in this. You can see, for example, that boys are generally more interested in digital resources than girls, not in all countries. Now, you can see actually in some countries in this region, that is not the case. But in the majority of countries, you can see it's greater interest among boys in digital resources. You can also see among boys, there is more awareness that, these things could be useful for a job. There is a greater sense, interest in digital resources because, it could be a kind of instrumental interest in being useful for a job. And last but not least, we see that there's interest in computer programming more prevalent among boys. And unfortunately, what you see here as a pattern is what you can actually see when you look at how students choose their studies. Now, we see still a big gender imbalance in the share of women going into, computer science and so on. So we should take those indications here quite seriously. What we, do not address in the early years of life in school, very, very hard to turn around later in life. But again, there are some countries where it is turned into the other direction, where there are more girls interested. So it shows us, again, these are not things that are inherent in gender, but very much about the environment and what's going on in school. Now, so let's have a look at confidence. Basically, searching things online, you can see that most students say that they can, find relevant information online. Now, I can look things up on Google and so on. 60 or two-thirds of students basically say they don't have problems with this. And if you look at the people who do well on the test, the skill performers is, over 70%. Now, that's not so much the problem. But look at the right side. Assessing the quality of information online, you have only about half of the students, even among skilled performers. Students doing well on the PISA test is less than 60%. And that's really one of the challenges of our times. Yes, students have that, intuition to look things up, capacity to look things up, but they often do not have that sense, I can actually check whether, something is true. Navigate ambiguity, distinguish fact from opinion. And again, those are things that we need to more actively engage with in the world in which we are today, in the world where, you can no longer necessarily trust what you read, where you have to question that information. And you can see that plays out pretty much across all countries. In all countries, you can see, or virtually all countries, that the green bar being confident that you can search things online, and the red dot being confident that you can assess the quality of information, there's a discrepancy. And in some countries, it is actually pretty large. So this is clearly something that education needs to be more engaged with. And you can see actually fewer than half of the students discuss the accuracy of online information with their teachers. Teachers are not yet in that mindset to engage with students about the quality of information, the relevance of information. Students, tend to compare different sources on their own. They tend to check the accuracy of online information before sharing it on social networks. But when it comes to the classroom, we are often still in the mindset of teaching students what's in the textbook, as opposed to, getting them engaged in discussing, to what extent they can rely on what they read and what they're not. So there are many things that we need to, take to heart from this report. The most important thing really is that in the world in which we live today is not just about what you know in school, what you have learned in school, but it's really about building a solid foundations of effective strategies that enable students to continue learning throughout their lives. And those strategies depend very much on the attitudes and behavior of young people. They depend very much on what's spent in the classroom. You could see the perception that students have of their teachers, that the social relationship they perceive. My teacher is supportive. My teacher is interested. The teaching strategies that are occurring, all of those things are very, very important predictors of, the extent to which students engage as active learners. And last but not least, technology. In this new world, we need to help students better find their way through, navigating ambiguity, complexity, and distinguishing what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's not true. The good thing is, PISA shows us some countries are very advanced with this. Many countries show interesting patterns on this. There's so much that we can learn from and with each other to prepare young people for their future and not just for our past. Thank you very much. Shukran. And I open this for any questions that you may have or that the online audience may have.
Andreas? I just have questions. Is there any correlation between the results of PISA, the first, the general one, PISA results, and for mathematics, science, and reading with the life skills? I mean, to what extent is that? I mean, for all the countries, there is a correlation, or is different?
We do see a very strong correlation, actually, for most of the learning strategies that I portrayed and the mathematics outcomes, the success on PISA. It's not so clear often what's cause and effect. It could well be that high performers, are also more interested, more curious. If you do well in mathematics, it, may drive you to do more. Or to what extent effective learning strategies, are actually the reason for students doing well on the PISA mathematics test. What is very clear is that there is a very strong connection between, ownership of effective learning strategies and success on the PISA mathematics test. And that relationship is visible throughout the world, really.
Mr. Andreas, I have a few questions, if you allow me to ask. Intrinsic motivation seems to be highly influential in student performance. What are some ways to instill a love of learning in students?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good kind of question. Now, how can we as a teacher not just, teach content, but actually engage students to become, interested, curious, and not just in the subjects, but to love to learn? Because as you could see, those are very powerful predictors for many of the outcomes we are discussing today. And, I guess it depends very much on the learning environment that you create as a teacher. If you come as a teacher with the idea students have to learn what's in the textbook, probably you're not actually seeing that, engagement and motivation. If you get students in a mind of asking questions, starting out with a real world problem, a problem that students want to solve, and then get them to think about, what kind of mathematical tools and strategies could you deploy to solve that problem that is important to you? And then when they see suddenly, wow, I can solve that problem using mathematical tools, I can see a problem in ways I couldn't see before. And then at the end of the day, interpret the mathematical results in a form that is relevant to their lives. Probably, you instill that ownership of learning, you instill that the fact that students can actually make a difference to their own life, get interested, get curious, and hopefully also, then love to learn. I think the moment that students feel really that they take ownership of their learning, you see them more likely to love to learn. So the design of learning environments is a critically important part. But you could also see from the data, simply the quality of relationships between students and teachers is important. Do you perceive your teacher, you could see that on the charts, do you perceive your teacher to be someone who is interested in you, who knows who you are, who you want to become, who supports you on your learning? Now, I think those are also really, really important aspects that we can build better into the future of education.
The second question from the chat: is there currently a system that OECD uses where literacies, cognitive skill, and non-cognitive skills are integrated in a continuum so that they are developed and assessed to provide a holistic picture of student development?
At the OECD, we're not so much in curriculum. We're looking more on the outcomes of this. We're looking more at the type of, tasks. But you can make inferences from this on how to build literacy. Now, literacy is very much about your capacity to use and apply knowledge. It's not just about, what you know, it's about how you can actually deploy, how you use, how you extrapolate from what you know, how you use your knowledge, sometimes in novel and in unfamiliar settings. This is how we design our PISA tests. And many of the tasks present students with problems that they haven't seen before, because we want to know to what extent can they extrapolate what they know, apply the knowledge in novel settings. That's this kind of concept of literacy that underpins our work on evaluation and assessments. Because, in the world in which we live, and in the world of ChatGPT, Google, this world no longer rewards you just for what you know. Google knows everything. This world rewards you for what you can do with what you know. And that's really why this concept of literacy has become so incredibly important in every subject area, not just in reading, but also in mathematics and science. Can you think like a scientist? Can you design an experiment is so much more important than just remembering, the results of an experiment. Can you think like an historian? History is not about names and places, but it's about understanding how the narrative of a society has emerged, how it developed, how it advanced, and sometimes how it unraveled. It's thinking like an historian. And that's the kind of literacy concept that is so important in the world today that we use in our assessment. But, how to build that into teaching and learning strategies is another topic that the OECD has not worked as much on.
So the other question is, how would you explain that girls feel less confident in their learning skills than boys, despite being so motivated to learn?
That's a very good question. In a way, you can say boys and girls sit in the same classroom, experience the same kind of learning situation. Still, you can see that difference in anxiety. You can see that difference in interest and so on. So it could be that, there are things happening that the teacher doesn't, realize themselves. I can tell you, for example, this is not from this report, but we have done studies in the past on this. Sometimes teachers give boys and girls similar marks, even if they have the same PISA test score. So there is some, stereotype in the mind of a teacher that makes judgments implicit, and they send signals to boys or girls. Thinking, if a girl does well on a science test, you give her a better mark than you would give to a boy because you're surprised. You didn't expect her to do as well as well. And those kinds of things could send a kind of implicit signal. Even though they sit in the same classroom, the experience could be different and could influence those social and emotional outcomes. It could also be there are things that happen outside the classroom, basically families, expectations, society, and so on. There could be lots of factors, but it is a very, very good point that we need to work harder to ensure not just that students are sitting through the same, learning content, but have similar experiences. Because the attitudes and expectations that students develop early in life are very, very hard to change later in life. Basically, even the attitudes that girls and boys have towards their future at age 15, the most important decisions about your life and your career, you do not make when you graduate from school. You make when you begin school. It is those first years that are very, very formative. And therefore, I think these results show us we're not doing well enough yet to ensure that boys and girls have really the same opportunities.
So the last question from my side. Given the reported persistence of gender gaps in digital skills interest, particularly in programming, what are the actions that the OECD do for the countries suggest to reduce this disparity?
Very good point. Actually, I think this is where countries in the Middle East often are exemplary. Actually, there are a number of countries here in this region where girls actually have a greater prevalence than boys in engaging with programming. I didn't show you the breakdown by countries, but when you look at this by country, you can actually see, countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, actually the Palestinian Authority, and so on. They do actually quite well in ensuring that, girls engage in those kinds of subjects, which again tells us is not, inborn. It's something about the environment. But still, unfortunately, when you look at actual kind of career pathways, even if that attitude is instilled in school, we still see that the prevalence of women pursuing those kinds of studies later in life is still much, much lower. And again, I think this could have to do with the environment, with the role models. If you do not see women in those kinds of jobs as a girl, you might think, oh, well, this is not for me, even though I'm quite good at it in school. So I think we have to do a lot more to ensure that the signals we send to children encourage more girls to engage in this. By the way, also more boys. I would actually still think that the numbers that you see here, both for boys and girls, are still quite low compared with what our societies will require in the future. And in the future, all jobs will be digital jobs. And in a way, I think that the confidence and capacity of young people to engage with that digital world, beyond being just a consumer of digital kind of content, but being actively engaged in the design, the programming, the coding, and so on, is something that you would wish every young person would be interested but it's clearly not yet the case, and there is clearly a gender gap in many countries that we need to close. But again, I would say actually the Middle East sets a good example now, where actually in many cases girls are quite good at that and quite interested in this.
That's all. Thank you so much, Mr. Andreas.
Thank you very much. Shukran.